Hey everyone, what's up? It's Ellie here. At the 2019 Game Awards, we were greeted by the familiar games industry faces Rafael Colantonio and Julian Roby as they announced their new game development studio Wolfeye, as well as their first title, Weird West, with a trailer and then later released a dev commentary alongside some gameplay. Since then, we have seen the game grow and change through small snippets on the Wolfeye Studios' social media pages, as well as through the posts from members of the development team. And when the new Journeys trailer dropped recently, as well as an in-depth dev Q&A and commentary with uninterrupted gameplay on the Wolfeye Studios Twitch page, we were finally given a thorough updated look into the strange and dark world of Weird West. With just over a month left until the beginning of the USA's season of Fall 2021, the only rough date of release we've been given for the game, we might not have to wait for very much longer. And so I want to take you through the changes the game has seen since its announcement and go through everything we now know about Weird West so far. Weird West is described as an action RPG experience set within a surreal vision of the developing frontier. First announced and shown off as a top-down, somewhat bird's-eye view experience, the game has since evolved into an isometric parallel viewpoint which accentuates that three-dimensional effect. I feel that this change really does improve the immersion of the gameplay. The camera's perspective isn't static and can also pivot and move around the character while being played, which I imagine will help with both combat and the exploration side of the game. A little bit of that is being shown off in the demos we've seen so far. Weird West is a dark fantasy reimagining of the Wild West. In fact, the term Weird West is actually a collective term for the hybrid genres of the fantasy western, horror western, and science fiction western. The term originated in 1972 with DC's Weird Western Tales, a comic anthology. Fallout New Vegas is another video game that takes on the different hybrids of weird westerns within the narrative, and had particularly strange encounters that increased when the player took on the Wild Wasteland trait. And Hunt Showdown, which is also a weird western video game, focusing on mostly a dark fantasy and horror hybrid of the Wild West. But there doesn't seem to be many other games that take this genre on, especially one that can be described as an isometric immersive sim action RPG, which makes Weird West quite unique. In Weird West, we'll be following the journeys of up to 5 heroes. Let's go through who these 5 heroes are and what we know about them so far. Jane Bell, the bounty hunter. We were first introduced to Jane Bell in posts on Wolfeye Studios' social media pages. Meet the bounty hunter. You'd buried your irons, traded them for a normal life. Tonight though, that's all gonna change. Destiny's calling, and it ain't taking no for an answer. The character art in this post gives us a closer look at who Jane Bell is, and she seems kind of badass. The artist here is Cedric Peyravenet, and their art style is so familiar, well, because they did a lot of the art and character concept art for Dishonored, Prey, and even The Outer Worlds. I've linked their Instagram in the description below so you can go check them out. We actually learn a lot about Jane Bell in this demo, as it is from her perspective. We start the game by entering her story, a brief cinematic where her husband Alonzo is kidnapped and her son Huck is murdered by a group called the Stillwaters. Jane erupts from her sleep in pain from a burning at her neck. It looks like you've been branded with a cattle iron, the game mentions. Sheriff Flora Albright arrives on the scene and finds Jane to tell her that every farm from here to Galen's Crossing has been targeted by this group. She encourages Jane to dig her shooting irons back up from her old bounty hunter days and meet her at Grackle to interrogate one of the gang members the sheriff had managed to arrest, who actually turns out to be working for a set of preachers called the Sirens. The Sirens are cannibals who transform into beasts. It starts to make sense when you go back to the cinematic. They kill her child Huck because he doesn't have enough meat on his bones, but kidnap the father Alonzo. Jane Bell kinda seems like a bit of a John Wick kind of character. John Wick being a former hitman who returns to the underworld he fought to leave behind after a group of Russian gangsters break into Wick's home, kill his dog, knock him unconscious, and steal his car after just losing his wife to a terminal illness. Or even a bit like Brian Mills in Taken, a former CIA agent who travels across Europe and relies on his old skills to save his estranged daughter, who has been kidnapped while on a trip to Paris. We may have actually met Jane way back when the game was announced. In a dev commentary, we see a female character who doesn't really look like Jane as we know her, by a window who seems quite distressed. She does get shot, which could mean she doesn't make it, but she also might survive and seek revenge. The reason I believe this could have been an earlier concept of Jane is because she actually calls out for Huck, her son. Comparing the demo to the dev commentary last year showcases some very noticeable differences as development has gone on over time. Clern's Keek, the Pigman, or at least that's how I think I pronounce his name. We haven't gotten very much clarification about his pronunciation, so I apologise. We don't get to see Clern's or any of the other journeys other than Jane's during the demo, but we have seen a bit of his story and the Pigman in general since the game was announced, with even a model of a Pigman being made for the Devolverland Expo 2020 game. Clern's is cursed, and is seen as a monster in the eyes of fellow man. We see the origins of this curse briefly in the Journeys trailer, where a woman named Ruth is hosting ceremonies to bind decapitated heads of pigs to human men, transforming them into monsters physically. In a conversation between Clern's and a character named Pigman Joe, we learn that in order to end the curse for good, they need to destroy the Soul Tree by finding its 3 taproots in various locations and burning them. Pigman Joe also tells Clern's that they need to eliminate Ruth in the meantime to stop her from creating any more pigmen, and that she'll be located in her secret workshop, either in or nearby a place called Kanker. Both the objective to eliminate Ruth and the location given are in blue, which is probably highlighting that they will be newly added objectives for us to follow, maybe in a journal or quest page. We also see Clern's briefly in combat, a combat style more tanky, ramming into enemies and stomping the ground that sends a shockwave that either knocks enemies back or completely wipes them out. I wonder if the Pigman's specialty is melee with that butcher connotation. Another cool ability that Clern's has that I believe is one of his class abilities is to summon a spirit pig into combat, which we see briefly in the Journeys trailer too. Clern's doesn't seem like a hostile character generally though, but pigmen seem to be feared across the Weird West. Perhaps Clern's is different from many of his faction. Across Waters. Across Waters is a guardian of the land. Tracking an evil wind across the plains with his bow and arrow, he might have been sent on a quest by his faction, who we see in the Journeys trailer. We meet another character, called Marianne Wilson, through the snippet of AC's conversation in the Journeys trailer, with mention of Olvidado's Lost Gold Mine and the Lost Fire Nation, of which will likely be the focuses of his story in the Weird West. Desiderio Rios is a man who can transform himself into a werewolf, affiliated with a whole faction of werewolves that seem to be led by a man named Cleric Franciscus, who we see Desi talking to in the Journeys trailer. The cleric seems to be discussing a prophecy. It seems like they may have been addressing the Lycan crowd before turning to Desi and asking if they'd like to say a word. Our options here are to give a speech of fire and brimstone, which is an expression referring to God's wrath, which could mean choosing a more chaotic path, or Desi could speak about finding peace, potentially indicating a more conflict-free approach. Lastly, Desi can be silent and impartial. Perhaps previous decisions will determine what the future holds for this faction. According to comments made during the Q&A livestream, there is a much deeper lore when it comes to the werewolves in the Weird West. Nell Bitterleaf. Nell Bitterleaf is a future seer who seeks to change what's coming. We are also briefly introduced to her in the Journeys trailer, along with another character called Edith Frond. Edith in the dialogue points out a mark that Nell has that glows as it calls for its owner, making the observation that the Nell here is not the Nell she has known. She speaks of rumours of the 21, those who have lived for thousands of years. Nell seems to be one of them, as well as part of perhaps another group called the Authority. Nell can act surprised, or tell Edith that she has suspected this or known all along. Nell's combat shows her running around emitting a pink glow that is likely some sort of shield power as she shoots her pistol. Green floating crosses may mean that she's recently used a consumable to regain her health or another ability. Nell uses a teleportation ability, likely a unique class ability, to disappear and reappear behind 2 enemies. Stars around their heads might signify a daze that might be triggered by the teleportation, allowing Nell the time she needs to get the upper hand in the situation against multiple shooting enemies. While the game has specific journeys for these 5 characters, you play through them in a set chronological order. This means you can interact with and even recruit the characters you've already played as or are yet to play, because in some way all 5 of these characters are connected. What is for certain is that all 5 are tied together for a purpose deeper than they know. From what we've seen of the demo, there is no voice acting for these characters. However, we do have a narrator throughout the game, the voice from the Journeys trailer. I believe we might also be able to play as more than just these 5 characters. I know we'll have control over the members of our posse, but there are some screenshots and clips that I don't think show the icons of our main 5 heroes in play, so I'm not really sure how the hero switching is going to work exactly. Each hero's journey is unique and tailored to the actions taken by the player. They involve a series of high-stakes adventures where everything counts and the world reacts to the choices you make. The game not only adjusts based on narrative decisions, but actions taken in the environment. This falls into the description of an immersive simulation, a video game genre that emphasizes player choice, utilizing simulated systems that respond to a variety of player actions which allow the game to support varied and creative solutions to problems beyond what has been explicitly designed by the developer. They allow for multiple approaches to a game. They are described as having smaller worlds than open world games, but allow for open-ended gameplay, allowing for the player to progress in any order and pursue side missions alongside any main story missions. From what we've learnt about Weird West, specifically from what we've learnt about the game during the dev Q&A and gameplay demo, is that Weird West really is an immersive sim. The game's environment is completely reactive to any and all decisions you make, as well as how you interact with the environment and its NPCs. For example, the game allows elements to interact with one another. So kicking an unstable makeshift bench knocks it over into its individual pieces. You can try to throw a bottle in the air and shoot it, or drop an oil lamp, which of course is a combination of an ignited flame and oil, which means that it will create a fire in the place it lands, environment permitting. In this example, an oil lamp is thrown onto some cropland, an environment that is quite dry and flammable. The flames begin to spread and meet the spilled oil, as well as catch onto anything else that is flammable or now oiled. But the player can now also throw a barrel of water onto the fire and oil, drowning the flames. The barrel, however, is caught on fire and luckily rolls away from the flammable dry crops. It sits in flames until it's either rolled back into the puddle of water or is destroyed. This can be utilized during combat, creating explosions by shooting a packet of bullets or other combustible elements, leading enemies into oil spills and setting them on fire, or ridding the player of flames just by jumping into the water or rolling across a puddle. Weather adds a whole other layer to this. If it's raining, the flames won't stay around for long. Things, including the player, are marked as wet to note this. The player can also be oiled if they've come in contact with oil at all, making the character more flammable. You can also see the status of other people in the world, including dead bodies. Poison barrels can also be kicked over onto enemies. Combining the element with fire will cause an explosion. I would like to see if the poison actually weakens the target too, perhaps making them more susceptible to damage, though this was something the devs didn't bring up. Wind can also have an effect on how the elements react around the player, and though this hasn't been demonstrated publicly, tornadoes were mentioned as featured in the game, as well as having the ability to become elemental based on what they come in contact with. An unfortunate tumbleweed could also mean the accidental spread of fire and cause a lot of destruction unless it's dealt with. Of course, none of this will happen unless it's happening in the particular area you're currently in. You're not going to come back to town and see it entirely in flames unless that's actually part of the narrative. There is also a day and night cycle in the game, and if you want to advance time a little, you can by using the loiter option in the menu. This will skip time by about 12 hours. Reading the little description pop up here, we can read that we can sleep in a bed to also advance time as well as regenerate health points. You won't be able to do either, however, if there are enemies nearby. Choosing to loiter during the day will bring you closer to the evening. This can facilitate a more stealthy approach according to the devs, meaning that there must be lower visibility in the dark. A major point that drives this immersive sim label is the fact that everyone in the game can die. The player can choose to kill anyone they come across. This is not free from consequence, and the level of consequence varies. For example, in the gameplay demo, the player chooses to shoot a criminal in jail for revenge. But though the player had no authority to do so, they were not severely punished for their actions because the criminal they shot was, well, a criminal, a bad person. Had the player not killed this person, they may have had access to more information to help them move forward in their journey, or perhaps they would have had an effect on the narrative in a different way. Killing this criminal brings down the player's reputation with the town, though not as much as killing someone of high importance or innocence. Reputation dictates how other characters feel about the player's active character. This can have an effect on whether you can hire particular mercenaries of certain factions And it can also have an effect on trading prices. As we can see in the demo, items you find that can be sold have a general value, but may be bought or sold for less depending on your reputation with the merchant. You can also cause something called a vendetta. If you murder someone in the presence of someone else and that witness escapes, it is likely that they will come back to attack you in what's called a vendetta. We see this demonstrated in the very first demo. A vendetta ambush is a randomly occurring event and can be triggered by a member of your posse deciding to leave and set a vendetta due to your actions that they don't agree with. To make a little extra cash on the side, you can take on bounties from the bounty board. However, if your reputation sinks and you become infamous for your past actions, a bounty can be put on your character's head. If that happens, bounty hunters will start ambushing you, similar to a vendetta event. You can bring your reputation back up by helping people of different factions. For example, setting this prisoner free in the demo, even though it was never necessary. As well as a reputation boost, the player is also given the code to a safe that they can unlock as a reward. There was no comment on whether these acts of kindness will cause vendettas to disappear even before they have occurred. It's interesting to note that there doesn't seem to be any sort of mini-game to unlock anything like safes or doors, like there is in the Elder Scrolls games or Fallout, or even Dishonored when you're actually putting in the combination. We also saw in the gameplay demo that if you don't have the required lockpicks on hand, for this case it was 3 lockpicks to unlock a reinforced door, you can also try to gather materials to blow it up. There is also mention of breakable wooden doors that can be unlocked simply by damaging it with bullets as a less extreme measure. Fortunately, every time there's a door to unlock, or explode, there seems to always be the materials needed readily accessible if you have a look around. The player didn't explore the whole level, and didn't have the required amount of lockpicks, but nearby was a storage room that not only had an extra lockpick, but the dynamite needed to get through the door. Another similar situation was shown a little earlier in the demo, where the only way into a building was to find a rope and climb down a skylight. With the rope the player located before, they could tie the rope to the skylight and use it to get inside and out Rainbow Six style. There is no animation for this action, just a fade in and out of the outdoor and indoor scenes. The rope is also a single-use item similar to a lockpick, as you cannot retrieve the rope once you've used it. Again, if there is a locked door, then there must be a key or another means of opening it. Whether you find it stored away on someone's person or you're given it as a reward or quest item, the fact that you know that there are several different ways that you can approach a door or some sort of obstructed path really does drive that immersive sim aspect into the game. Locks and explosions are not the only way you can navigate the Weird West. There is a little bit of parkour that can be done that allows the player more movement than simply utilizing doorways and opens up the map to verticality. The player has the ability to climb and jump onto and over objects and walls within a reasonable height. For example, using the different levels of rooftops here to jump onto this separate rooftop and therefore find the skylight. Because most of the objects in the world are not static, like in this example from the demo where a crate is moved from its original place and used to climb the wall from the place of the player's choice, not just where the devs make it generally obvious. We've also seen that a barrel roll is possible. This could be used to bypass flames or extinguish them, but though it wasn't exclusively stated, we could potentially also use the roll to bypass obstacles we may not be able to climb over, but perhaps could roll under. Lastly, we've also seen that epic side jump in the trailer by both Jane Bell and Across Waters. With all these choices, the consideration of reputation and consequence for your actions, the question stands: is it possible for players to play as a pacifist? And according to Rafael Colantonio, the game's creative director, you can almost play as a pacifist. This is because there are people in which the player will have to take down. He also added that they have not yet achieved a non-lethal playthrough of the game, so depending on the narrative of the game, it seems as if there are some targets who will die by your hand. However, in Dishonored, a non-lethal playthrough could be achieved, a game where the player had multiple targets to eliminate, but could utilize multiple pathways to determine in what way the target is eliminated. A game that Raf was also a creative director for. So a lethal only playthrough was somewhat confirmed, but the game is still in development, so maybe by release it could potentially be possible. Raph did also mention that the game counts how many people the player kills, so Weird West may have a chaos system like Dishonored does, in which case a low chaos playthrough would be achievable. However, a stealth playthrough seems to be quite attainable nonetheless, especially when utilising the extra movement and taking time to analyse the environment. Infiltrating in the evening and taking advantage of the shrubbery help the player navigate around enemies undetected. In this example from the demo, the player follows an enemy around the perimeter of the camp, waiting for a chance to strike. They notice the enemy has come to a stop to have a smoke, in which the player slowly walks out from the bushes, still briefly hidden after leaving the shrubs, and sneaks up behind the enemy, putting them in a chokehold and leaving them unconscious on the floor. A non-lethal takedown. So not all of your takedowns are lethal at the very least. And whether or not your takedowns are lethal or non-lethal could have an effect on your reputation with the faction. During the most recent demo, we exclusively viewed combat from the perspective of Jane Bell, where the player equips their first weapon, which is a revolver. They are given a bit of a tutorial-like scenario with some makeshift targets. The combat is in real time, not turn-based, and aiming your gun will show you its line of fire to more easily help players line up their shots. When each of these items are aimed at, a health bar will show up to show the player just how much more damage they need to take. The weapon wheel isn't brought up here, but in the Journeys trailer we do get to see it. The player chooses their weapon from a wheel that allows 5 different options: a shotgun, a revolver, a rifle, a knife, and a bow and arrow. We also see a second wheel to the right showcasing different consumables, which we don't have the names of yet. Consumables are not really mentioned in the newest demo, but using a bit of speculation, we might have the classic health where the bandages are, and the rest could be something like a liquid health consumable, or maybe even consumables similar to Fallout, where you could increase intelligence or charisma, since we now know we have dialogue options. Perhaps things like alcohol or soups, however. We do get to see an invigorating elixir briefly while looting. An invigorating elixir replenishes your action points, which perhaps allows you to use an ability again after using it and being put on a cooldown. But again, it wasn't really spoken about. However, cooking was. And cooking materials like chicken eggs, meat, corn, and potatoes here create consumables that also restore health. It also looks like all food items here restore about 5 health points. I thought perhaps different foods would restore different levels of health, but that doesn't seem to be the case so far. Not long after this, they came across bandages which heal for 50 health points, as well as cure bleeding status from wounds. It's also an item we want to have on hand because it helps heal our fallen, incapacitated companions. We do see another weapon wheel later in the demo that allows for more options. 10 slots. This might be a quick search type wheel where you can add your top 10 marked items, which include slots for items like dynamite and shrapnel mines, as well as your favourite consumables to be easily and quickly accessed in combat. Something similar to Dishonored or maybe Fallout 76 even. Weapons also have stats that tells the player about its damage, ammo capacity, range, attack rate, value, and a stat called Owned, of which I'm not sure of its meaning. You will also quickly be able to tell if a weapon you're considering picking up is better than the one you currently have equipped. At a quick glance, you'll see a red or green arrow indicating that the weapon is or isn't better in some areas, and if you hover over the weapon, it'll give you the details. This particular weapon can be upgraded at a blacksmith's forge with 6 copper nuggets, which means that the weapons have a tier system. This revolver has a single star on its icon, which could be referring to it being a basic tiered weapon. We later find silver nuggets in the gameplay demo, and it is explained in the items info that it can be used to upgrade copper weapons to silver. It can also be melted down along with another nugget to be turned into a silver bar and sold for maximum profits at a bank. So it seems we can upgrade and possibly craft weapons at the blacksmith's forge. And though I'm unsure what the first tier's material is, the next tier is copper, then silver, and then maybe we'll be seeing golden weapons at the top tier. I also noticed a bison horn being looted. I'm not sure if this can be crafted into a type of knife, but if not, we also have seen that we can find amulets that can be equipped for buffs for your character. This particular one is called the Amulet of Rushing Blood, where on critical hits you regain a small amount of health. Perhaps you can also craft these amulets too. Amulets that are equipped and have an effect on your character seem to also have that shown in the status list on the left side of the inventory page. As well as the bison horn, however, they also come across bison hide, which could be used to craft armor potentially. As well as this hide, earlier in the demo, whilst looking through a crate, we also come across a skinning tool bag. It has no use in combat, but we'll need it to skin our kills on the hunt. It also allows for the skinning of snakes, deer, bears, and bison. So as well as meat, a skinning tool bag will allow you to collect the hide from these animals. The hide tiers potentially being in that order too for crafting different levels of armor. We did see combat between the player and coyotes, so I'm unsure if you'll be able to skin them as well, mostly because the player didn't have a skinning tool bag on the person, so the option might not have been there, but perhaps you do need one for the option to come up. Whether you can use them to craft or not. At the very least, it could be a way to make some money in the world selling hide. You either skin yourself or come by on your travels. Armor does exist, however, in the form of vests and can be equipped just like amulets on the inventory menu page. Though weapons like revolvers, shotguns, knives, rifles, and bow and arrows seem pretty straightforward, there is a deeper layer to them. With the addition of Nimp Relics, the player can upgrade both class and weapon abilities to gain an advantage in combat. Nimp Relics can be found around the map. They glow, and it's hard to tell from the audio of this demo, but may have a little chime or sound effect to help alert the player of their presence. During the demo, we get a glimpse at all the available unique class abilities for Jane, as well as all the revolver abilities, and one of each other weapon. Starting with the revolver, the first ability is called Lightning Rounds, where for 10 seconds, all pistol bullets are electrified, and targets take electric damage. It costs 3 Nimp Relics. So again, we're playing with the elements here, and in my head, I can already imagine a gunfight in a wet environment. Perhaps the enemy is wet from walking through a river or a puddle, or it's raining. And in this situation, Lightning Rounds could really help pack that punch and do more damage than normal bullets would on their own, especially if an electrically charged bullet hits the water some enemies are standing in or something similar to that. Perhaps the enemy has a weakness or an aversion to electric damage. However it works, it's certainly fun knowing we'll be playing around with these elements in this way. We also get somewhat of an image or maybe even a mini demo of the ability, but it's hovered over very briefly, so we don't actually get to see it play out. The next ability is High Noon, where on your next trigger pull, you automatically fire a single shot at every target within sight. Each shot using a bullet from your magazine, up to a maximum of 6 shots. So think Overwatch character McCree's High Noon ultimate. I don't think this ability is intended to work in the same way, in the sense that it instantly kills enemies, but if you have multiple enemies on low health or multiple targets that are generally low health enemies, it should really come in handy for those situations. This ability costs 2 Nimp Relics. Lastly, Fan the Hammer, where your next shot will fire all remaining bullets in your magazine. Another ability that is very similar to McCree's right-click ability in Overwatch. It costs only a single Nimp Relic, and is the one that is unlocked and demonstrated in this short playthrough. Now for the class abilities. The first class ability for the Bounty Hunter we get a sneak peek at is Roundhouse Kick, where for 20 seconds your kick deals more damage and objects are thrown further. We've seen the kick being used to throw barrels and ammo onto the ground in combat, but increasing the range of that kick could ensure the player's safety when engaging in combat from a distance, and being able to kick away enemies who engage in melee combat could be helpful to gain that distance back for shooting. It costs 1 Nimp Relic. The next is Shrapnel Mine, which sets a trap that will explode when enemies approach. Think the Spring Razor Mine from Dishonored. It also costs 1 Nimp Relic. Charm is the third Bounty Hunter class ability, where for 10 seconds, the enemies around you become your allies. Similar to the class ability Conversion in Diablo 2, belonging to the Paladin, this ability costs 2 Nimp Relics. The last Bounty Hunter class ability is Quick Thinker, where for 6 seconds time slows, but you move more quickly, likely quite similar to Dishonored's Bend Time. The ability costs 3 Nimp Relics. Now we get a quick look at the rest of the weapons abilities. Starting with the shotgun, we see the Rapid Reload ability, which fires shells without having to reload for 5 seconds. This costs 1 relic. The next is for the rifle, called Bullet Hail, perhaps an indirect nod to the game Bulletstorm, where firing speed is increased by 20% for 10 seconds. During that period, each successful shot increases firing speed by an additional 10%. Swift Shots is the first ability we get a look at for the bow, where arrow fire rate is increased for 10 seconds. Maybe something along the lines of Hanzo's Storm Arrows ability in Overwatch. This one costs 2 Nimp Relics. Lastly, we see one of the knife abilities, Bloodthirsty, where for 10 seconds attacks do an additional 50% damage. Damage bonus increases to 100% if the target is currently bleeding. This ability costs 2 Nimp Relics. If we skip ahead, we can also get a look at the rest of the knife abilities when one is also unlocked. The first we see is Spinning Strike, where you strike all targets within melee range in a single spinning slash, damaging them and leaving them stunned for 3 seconds. This costs 2 Nymph Relics. The next is Adrenaline, where melee attack is increased by 50% for 10 seconds with a cost of 3 Nymph Relics. And the last is Charge, where the player rushes quickly into melee range and deals high damage to your target, causing them to bleed. This kind of reminds me of the Demo Knight playstyle in Team Fortress 2, honestly. This ability costs 1 Nymph Relic. Another thing I wanted to point out was that earlier in the demo we open a crate where we hover over a pickaxe for a split second. Its stats are shown, including its damage and range. And in the beginning we see that green arrow on both the shovel and the pitchfork in the barn. This could mean that the knife abilities are basically just melee abilities in general, and that there may be a large range of different melee options for the player. Clearly there are going to be a lot of fun things to do with our weapons and character. There wasn't any information in terms of how many relics there are in the world and whether you'll be able to unlock every single ability at some point, or if there was a limit. But it was confirmed that if you drop an item somewhere or put it in a chest, it will be there if you travel to the same spot with your next character. If that is the case, does this apply to Nymph Relics too? Is it possible to travel all over the map as one character and loot everything to the point that it makes things difficult for your next characters, or make it easier by dropping it all in one easy place to get? During a discussion in the demo, Raph mentioned that there was a carry weight limit, so it's not like you can stash and hoard everything on your person, but it does make me think about whether or not I should be thinking about picking up every Nymph Relic I find and unlocking every ability I can. During the demo, a Golden Ace of Spades was picked up. Its item description outlined that it could be used to learn or upgrade Explorer perks. It looks like the perks you can unlock and upgrade will be remembered by each hero you play, which is pretty neat. Let's have a quick look at the perks we're shown in the demo. Posse Leader. Boost posse member damage output and maximum hit points by 10%. Haggler. Reduce shop prices and service fees by -10% and increase markup when reselling items by 10%. Scrounger. Find 10% more gold in containers. Locksmith. Gain a 10% chance to save a lockpick from breaking when picking a lock. And Demolitionist. Deal 20% more explosive damage with dynamite and cluster dynamite. While Weird West is somewhat of an open world game, you will have to specifically load into chunks of the map. We see the area limits of Jane's farm during the demo. Edges of the area are designed to look like the edge of a map, which was shown off in better detail in a tweet. The fast travel and map work similarly to the early Fallout games. A fog of war covers the map and fades as you explore the area. Hovering over a location shows the amount of time that will pass as you travel. This can help you determine what time of day you'll arrive. As I noted earlier, there is a day and night cycle and an option to loiter to pass time. An animation will show your character traveling as the area loads. Similar to Fallout 1, a random encounter can bring your travels to a halt. In the one we're shown in the demo, the player is stopped by a coyote attack. Once the attack is over, the player can run back to the edge of the area's limits, reselect the location they want to go, and their travels continue. Player can also travel anywhere into the fog of war. Raph during the demo mentioned that you can try to potentially rush to certain locations to end the game, but there are objectives that need to be completed, which won't make it as simple as just fast traveling to the other side of the map. It was mentioned by Raph that every single building in the game is a building that you can enter and explore. We've heard this claim in the past, but after seeing the demo, I do believe this will be the case. Not every building has much to see, but every building seems to have some sort of entry point. And as I mentioned earlier, most doors can either get bypassed by an explosive, or lockpicking, or just by simply damaging it with bullets or kicking it in. We can learn a lot about the world through paying attention to the little details in the notes we find on our journeys. Through them we can also find clues about how to navigate the spaces we're in or how to find our objectives. For example, a note that we find in the demo is written by someone to a Clyde and reminds Clyde that because they have been leaving a rope by the well, the boss has cut their rations again. They also mention that the well can be unlocked. In the same room is a rope and a key that we now know we should take to utilize this hidden entry. Loading screens also seem to gear players up with general knowledge. In this one they mention that if we want a glimpse into the daily lives of the Weird West folk, take a peek inside their mailboxes. Most folk will get fresh mail over time, so you can keep coming back for more. Playing games like Fallout have basically ingrained in me to always check to see if I can interact with the mailbox and maybe find some loot, but what's always fun is finding a piece of narrative in the form of a handwritten note, flyer, or newspaper. Loot can also regenerate, so if you're in an active town and check someone's mailbox for some lore, or just something to loot in general, you might find some more if you come back later. You can also store loot in storage containers or bury it in the ground to find later, or later as another character. Similar to loot respawning, if you wipe out a whole town or a general location like a camp or a mine, there is a chance it will be repopulated at some point by one of the various factions. We also got to see the start menu of the game, and if we look to the right we can see a news banner with a little snippet of a report. This one reads, "Reports are rolling in from across the Weird West of a plague of undead rising from the grave. Worse, a terrible sickness seems to follow in their wake. Stay sharp, travellers." This might be referring to the plague-ridden enemies we saw in the Journeys trailer, who I thought reminded me of a mix between the Weepers from Dishonored and the Nest Keepers from Dishonored 2. There was also a clip shared by the devs where the player had contracted the plague, which will raise the dead if you get close. They seem like they aren't hostile to the player, but that does look like a town's graveyard, which could mean trouble to the living in the area. Fame pop-up comes up onto the screen at the end, which could mean either raising the dead in the area has dropped your reputation with the people of the town, or it could have been triggered by the player beginning to shoot the dead, referring to the hostility of the zombies. We can also bury the dead, which is something I noticed as we came past a dead body of a villager in the demo. I wonder if this is a way to bring certain people back from the dead. They might rise as monsters, but I wonder if they could be cured once brought back to life. When the save is loaded back into, we briefly see what looks like a newspaper clipping, also seemingly referring to this plague, as well as reports of witches, sorcerers, and demons summoning heathens. They also mention what could be a faction named the Absolutionists, who are supposed to be purging the land of evil. But even if we can't bring our favourite villagers back from the dead, we actually saw in the demo, due to a glitch, that we might see our Fallen once again in ghost form. The ghost is only briefly noted as a system error at this point in the game, but I think there is a possibility that we might be able to interact with the dead, and this could add to that environmental storytelling aspect of the game. There is also a loading screen that mentions that those who die with unfinished business may return later, their spirits trapped in the world of the living. They could also feature in specific locations or as part of specific storylines, like in Skyrim, for example. In this demo, I noticed two major Easter eggs, which I wanted to bring to your attention. The first is right at the beginning, when Alonzo is taken and Huck is killed by the Stillwater Bandits. Their dog's life is also taken in the struggle. When Jane heads over to the scene, we can see that the wolf is called Ava, and in brackets is called a weird wolf. This is a reference to Weird Wolves, and to band member Ava Gore. Weird Wolves also features the game's co-creative director Rafael Colantonio as a member, and they've had their music featured in the game and trailers. The next is one I'm sure a few mega fans of the Arcane universe may have noticed. Towards the very end of the demo, we are given the code to unlock a safe. The code is 0451. It's the first safe code for each of the Dishonored games, and is featured in other games like Prey, Bioshock, and more. I actually have a whole video on it if you'd like to check it out. And as a fun little minor note that was mentioned in the Q&A, you will be able to pet the dog, as well as some horses. But if you're a pig man, you'll also be able to pet the pig, and there might be this somewhat telepathic connection sound that plays. Lastly, I'll mention some of the boring compared to everything else I've mentioned kind of stuff, but is still nice to know technical kind of stuff. Firstly, there will be two difficulty settings, normal and hard. There was a discussion during the Q&A about a third that may be added perhaps after release, which is described to be super punishing with a permadeath. However, this permadeath mode may include particular items around the world that the player can find and hold on to in order to resurrect themselves, but these items will be a limited resource. Secondly, there won't be any microtransactions, which I think makes sense for a single player game. And lastly, there definitely will be hotkeys for quick saving and quick loading. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and it was helpful, be sure to give it a like and definitely subscribe for more Weird West content. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!